Hi, everyone. I'm Jessie Young. I'm the Education and Workforce Development Consultant at Advocate Aurora Health, and I've been part of Emerging Women Leaders since 2019. I'm so honored to serve as the Vice Chair of the Professional Development Event Committee, the committee that put this event together. I'm so excited to moderate this panel. This topic is very near and dear to my heart. I've seen and felt firsthand the stigmatization of mental health. I have an anxiety disorder and have some post-traumatic stress. Some of my closest loved ones have dealt with anxiety and depression. Anxiety and depression are a little bit more discussed these days or talked about in various environments, but I also have loved ones who live with some of the more stigmatized diagnoses like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, manic depressive disorder, and borderline personality disorder. I'm a huge advocate for telling our stories and ultimately working to take away the shame and ostracization that occurs when discussing mental health. I'm, again, so excited for these panelists. They're incredible. So please help me in the chat to welcome them. We have Lakita Caldwell, Alicia Fleischmann, and Amy Hanneman. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask each of them to do a quick introduction of the work they do and the reason they're passionate about mental health. First, how about Lakita? Would you mind?
Hi, I'm Lakita Caldwell. I am the director of the Opportunity Academy at Lumen Lutheran Schools. And this is important to me because I lost a student and a family member who died by suicide.
Thank you so much. Alicia, why don't you introduce yourself next?
Hi, I'm Alicia Fleischmann. I'm owner of Fleischmann Counseling, LLC, which is a private practice in Elm Grove, Wisconsin. And I specialize in perinatal mood and anxiety disorders and substance abuse. I'm a psychotherapist and a clinical supervisor, so I help other clinicians to get their full licensure in Wisconsin. And I'm passionate about this work because I also suffered from a postpartum anxiety disorder after my second was born. So I'm very happy to be here and talk about mental wellness in the workplace.
Thank you so much. And then last but not least, Amy, would you mind introducing yourself? Thank you. Oh, sorry, you're muted, Amy.
You get the intro all over again. These people are who I am. And I'm the leader of this Wonder Woman team that I have 4 little girls. And I'm also a leader at Northwestern Mutual, and I have the privilege of helping the company drive diversity and inclusion. And this is personal for me because I've been there, I am there. They might be there someday. And if we don't talk about this, how are we going to help them and who comes after us? So this leadership conversation is really important. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to have them each go more into detail about their stories. The reason that it's so important to normalize mental health and so important to share our story as members of the community, as leaders in the workplace or in our community, as colleagues, friends, family members, we must be comfortable talking about this. We do people a disservice if we don't show our vulnerability. People think that leaders have it all together and there's an expectation that women have it all together. But in sharing our stories, it shows others, this is how I deal with life. This is how I cope. And this is what I have to offer, or the resources that I have. It opens communication up and it really helps people bring their full selves to work, to school, to any environment, really. So I would love if each of our panelists could tell us a little bit more about their stories and their passions. I think I'll do the same order as we did introductions, if that's okay with the panelists. Lakita, would you mind telling us a bit more about your story?
Yes, so in October 12, 2015 changed my life. 2015 was one of the best career years I ever had. I was promoted. I won these major community awards. So I was celebrating. I was on such a high. But on October the 12th, 2015, I was at work and received a call from my father, missed the call. My sister called me and they found my brother that he had hung himself. And I didn't know what to do. I froze in my office because I had my staff there right in front of me. And then I let out a scream and I started crying. But it's crazy because I was like, I got to keep it together because my staff is here. I don't have time for this. But in my head, I was melting down, and I willed myself to stop crying because I was like, what is going on? And then they went to get my supervisor, and I felt like the breath had been knocked out of me to go from such a euphoric high to such a low. And I think about how I came back to work the day after we buried my brother because I didn't even take time. I just kept going. And I think about it now from October to December. I don't know how I functioned because I hadn't processed everything. But one of the things I did do every night that would help me just release was to journal. I journaled every night. And sometimes I would journal to where I would cry. So I would keep it together at work because I felt like that was what I needed to do. I was actually talking to people when they would see me. They were like, "Are you okay?" I'm like, my brother, he was bipolar. He stopped taking his meds, but I felt like I needed to make them feel better, even though I didn't feel better. And so through that process, through journaling, I put together a TED Talk, and it really talked about what was in my head during that time that I didn't feel comfortable articulating. But that process taught me that I would not sweep it under the rug. I would honor my brother and honor that student that I lost and say, it is okay to be human. I am not a superwoman. And not taking the time to grieve put cracks. And eventually, if you don't deal with the cracks and put the glue on it, it comes out somewhere. And so for me, food became my coping mechanism. I would eat, and that would absorb between eating and when I was at home and I could take the mask off and be vulnerable. Then I would release through my journal, through crying. But one of the things through my story, that's why I tell my story, that's why I share my talk, is that we are not superwomen. We do get to take the mask off. And when we normalize saying that it's okay not to be okay, productivity at work in our companies will rise. And then we create safe environments for people to get the help and support that they need. And at that time, to be transparent, I needed support. I needed someone to say, sit down somewhere, take a few days off. But because I became the stage of my own life, I put on that mask and kept moving forward. I was helping people, but I was driving a car and the engine was about to shut down. And the cost to buy an engine for a car when all I needed to do was just take a moment to cry, to grieve, and honor the process that I was in. I didn't take that time. And so the physical weight was added on, the pounds, but also that mental anguish. I remember feeling the stress in my neck. My neck was so tight and right behind my ear. So I shared this story to say, we are not superwomen, and we matter, and we have to honor. Your body never lies. And my body was creating signs and signals that it was not okay. And so I share my story, and so people know that it's okay to not be okay, and no is a complete sentence.
Oh my gosh, thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I appreciate you sharing. We're going to go into Alicia and Amy's stories too, and then we'll have questions as well. So Alicia, if you wouldn't mind saying a bit more about you and your story.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to share my story. So I knew mostly my whole life that I wanted to be a therapist. I love helping others, and I've always thought that mental health really matters. It's been very important to me. And truly, my whole life, I feel like I've been a great advocate for knowing what I need and how to ask for it with my mental health. And then when I had my first daughter, who's 5, and my second daughter, who's 2, it just really changed things for me in my mental health in the workplace. Your needs change when you become a mom. And then I had a very flexible job. I felt like the owners of the clinic that I worked for, they were really understanding, but the problem was I just didn't know how to specifically assess my own needs when I became a mom. And so with my postpartum anxiety, there were certainly challenges. And so a few years ago, I had opened up my own private practice because I feel very passionate about helping other women in the perinatal period learn specifically what do you need and how can you ask for that? How can you be an advocate for yourself? And that's why I'm happy to be here today and happy to be doing this work.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And Amy, if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit more, thank you.
Sure. So my mental health journey started when I was really young. And it's interesting because now that I reflect on the years when this was going on, I realized that I was acutely aware that I wasn't where I needed to be. And so it's been a lifelong journey from even that delicate stage as a child to try to right the ship, to try to feel better. Like I knew then I didn't feel the way I should feel. And it's been a constant struggle, which, makes me, again, when I think about my little girls or our children or women that are younger than us, how important it is to try to wrap them in love and support them through these things. But my family suffered from substance abuse, and that was very, very much a big part of my childhood. And I'm also a survivor, I should say thriver, through sexual abuse. And so if you know anything about how those two impacts to a person manifest, it's a lot of insecurity, fear of failure, unworthiness, never being good enough. And so, those are still things that even in my 40s now, I struggle with. And they affect how I show up to work. They affect how I lead my team. They affect how I am a mother. And so I've had lots of work, but it doesn't end. And so that's why constantly talking about these things and using our voices and sharing our stories is one of the most powerful things we can do to keep ourselves in check and then help others to get through their own hard times.
Well, thank you. I so appreciate it. And in you talking, I think I want to jump into a question for you, Amy, if you don't mind. As a leader in the work that you do, how do you suggest that we can make sure that mental health isn't a limiting factor for anyone to be perceived in the workplace specifically, but then if you have tips for other places too?
Yeah, I think it's about us sharing our stories first and foremost, especially leaders. Leaders must lead. And if we can't show up and be vulnerable, and vulnerability is courage, by the way. Vulnerability is not a bad word. And I love how Brene Brown has brought these two terms together in a lot more of a main stage type of way. But so leaders have to, and this is the Emerging Women's Leaders Forum, right? So leaders have to set that example, and that requires courage and educating. If you're in a company setting, you might have an employee resource group that leads the way on this, or mental health providers within your own ranks that can help educate and destigmatize this. And then through really resourcing, and I think about employee assistance programs that we have at NM and that I've experienced in other organizations, but they have to be resourced with the right type of staff. At NM, we've got dedicated counselors that are free to employees and focus on trauma as one example, right? So we don't just talk about normalizing that, but we actually resource it. And that's what really helps people overcome it or move forward towards overcoming it. So I think those are a few thoughts that I'd share.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And then Alicia, I'm wondering, Could you tell us some of what you've been seeing more prevalent with women in mental health? I know a couple of the things you mentioned: compassion fatigue, imposter syndrome, decision fatigue, things like that. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what you've been seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. So those are three common themes that I've seen, along with the comparison trap and also difficult personalities in the workplace, especially narcissism. That's something that some women do find a challenge. And especially for difficult personalities, I highly recommend the book Disarming the Narcissist. It just gives you some really practical ways in effective communication with difficult personalities, not just narcissism. And then, the compassion fatigue. So I'm noticing that with compassion fatigue, women are feeling overwhelmed or burnt out, angry, irritable, sad, they're anxious, they have reduced empathy, etc. And when we give too much, we get burnt out. And it might not be in one certain area. You might be compassionate or over compassionate in many areas of self, and then really reflecting on, am I having a good balance in resources with my time and energy? Where am I placing my energy? Where am I placing my time? And do I have good self-care? Another one, imposter syndrome, when we doubt our skills and accomplishments and attribute them to luck rather than our actual successes, and that we feel that, or we feel fearful that others are going to see us as a fraud. Actually, 70% of people have imposter syndrome, so it's very common. And it feels like, constantly questioning yourself, whether you're a good enough parent, spouse, friend, coworker. You feel like a fraud when you've worked really hard to get where you are, and you beat yourself up when you make one mistake, constantly feeling like you need to prove yourself and your worth, and being afraid of saying no, and overworking yourself to the point of burnout. So I think when people suffer from imposter syndrome, some things to keep in mind are setting boundaries with your work and having daily check-ins to assess your own needs. And those affirmations, which I saw in the PowerPoint prior to our panel, I am more than enough, I'm strong and capable and confident, I'm unique and have valuable gifts that set me apart. Those are huge. Really listen to how you're speaking to yourself. And then also the decision fatigue, like you had mentioned. So too many decisions that cause us to become overwhelmed. And it typically leads us to making risky decisions or avoiding making decisions. And so I think too that what's not talked about a lot is the invisible load. There's an Instagram account called it's _happy as a mother, and she has really great graphics about the invisible load of motherhood, but there's also invisible loads of women leaders. And so taking an assessment of what are those, what is that mental load that we're carrying, and what are all the decisions that we have to make? So how can we help with this? Focus on your self-care again, and minimize the low stake decisions to better cope with more vulnerable days or high stress days, such as meal planning, so you don't have to ask yourself what's for dinner after work, or having a Sunday check-in to kind of review your week ahead, engaging your support, making lists, and maintaining unchanging routines, allow others to help. I mean, there's a lot of things that can help here with this decision fatigue. And then the last one I just wanted to touch on really quick was the comparison trap, and the occurrence that we usually compare ourselves to people that we most closely identify with, as well as people within our personal circle. We usually compare to domains that we value, such as appearance, relationships, professional achievement, other goals. And something to keep in mind here too is practicing healthy social media behavior. I know that was talked about prior to our panel, and putting your phone down or having boundaries with your phone, seeking connection and not comparison. And another one, just really practicing gratitude, appreciating what others have, that, you know, and maybe some acceptance that you're not particularly good at something. And it could be a really helpful lesson.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think I also would like to chat about the Superwoman Syndrome a bit more, Lakita, if you don't mind, because I think a lot of some of the symptoms, some of the stressors, some of the things Alicia's been seeing, things in that Amy has touched upon, it's all a part of that Superwoman Syndrome. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Personally, the Superwoman Syndrome, being everything for everyone, was killing me personally. And so what I really literally, specifically during COVID, I had to take the Superwoman Syndrome off. I mean, not the take the title off, but also take my cape off. And I really did an assessment of what things that I needed to let, there were distractions, and really pour back into myself for self-care and look like non-negotiable. So I have like a non-negotiable contract of self-care for myself. As you see behind me, I have a diffuser. So I have at my work, I have it at my home. So my whole environment, I shifted my whole environment. So the smell, art makes me happy. I take walks. I do 10,000 steps a day, which is for me, at first it was to get physical weight off, but literally when I walk, I unwind, I debrief. And so really just saying that I'm not a superwoman. I have, just like we have a board, I have a self-help board. And they're the people who I can take my mask off with and share and feel like that they will support me. They will also say, hey, therapy is okay. You know, so I had to change my own narrative around therapy. I go to church and pray, but I also have a therapist that I talk to that helps me process everything that is going on to make sure my coping mechanisms are healthy coping mechanisms, because I see myself, but sometimes I can't see things that I just can't see. And so having someone who can guide and see in my self-help board, they guide and they see things I don't see. The affirmations, that also is a reminder that I'm not a superwoman. If you look to the left right now, I have a wall of things that I tell myself I am great. So that impostor syndrome, I don't need, that's not part of my narrative. I changed the music in my head because I have affirmations everywhere. I have vision boards behind me reminding. So everywhere I look, in my office, in my personal spaces that I'm in, it tells me I'm not a superwoman, I'm human. And I have human moments. And I show my team that I lead that I'm human and that they're human. Before we go into a meeting, I check in with my team. I'm saying, how are you doing? How's your day going? And you thumbs up if you had a great weekend in the middle. So before I go into something, I know what the mood of the room is. So everything that I do is about self-care, keeping my peace, keeping my joy. But as I shared with you earlier in my story, it took something tragic in my family before I stopped and said, hey, are you okay? Even though it may not be the moment or time, it is the moment or time that I can see you. Maya Angelou has a quote that talks about, I'm paraphrasing it a little bit, it's about how you treat a person, not necessarily what you say, but it's really how you treat a person. And we matter. Like we have titles, but the title Lakita is a person and she matters. Just like if you pour into me and see that I'm not a superwoman and remind me that I'm not a superwoman, I'm going to be highly effective. So as I shared, the Superwoman Syndrome, and that we can't be everything for everybody. We can't drive our car on empty. There's no gas in it. It's not going to go anywhere. Our mind, our body, and our spirit, when it's empty, it's tapped out. It's not going to go anywhere. And so this is a journey. My brother, the best gift he ever gave me was this journey of like, Lakita, you matter. And your life depends on you saying something.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I know in previous talks too, you had said that as a leader in the organization, you're really sensitive to nonverbal things that people do and how they show up. And even just being able to say something and say your energy looks different, and being present in that way. I love that, checking in before meetings and such too. Thank you. Would you mind also, Lakita, could you tell us a little bit more? You talked in our previous discussions about how the TED Talk came about and how it helped you heal.
Yes. So I
Thanks.
had a personal board. They became a part of my self-care board. They knew that I was journaling. And so I don't know, many of you know Sherry Williams Fennell. She told me to take my journal entries because art for me is not just about performing, but it's about social change and having your voice heard. And so she told me to take my journal entries and turn them into a one-woman show. And that's what I did. And then Northwestern Mutual is one of my favorite places. I have another mentor there, Gladys, told me, she was like, this would be a great TED Talk. And I was like, I don't do TED Talks, I'm an actor. And she was like, no, this would be amazing. So I listened to her, I turned it in, submitted it. But if I can tell you, actually my TED Talk was almost a year to the date that my brother took his life. And my cohort became my family. There were days that I couldn't root myself and be present as I shared the story, but sometimes I cried through practice. And to be able to write it, to get it out of my body, but to put it back in my body and to be present in that moment was so healing for me. To be able to go back and look and to say, okay, that's a trigger for me. I'm not quite healed from that. I still need assistance and help. And so to stand before an audience who I knew some of the people out there, but I didn't know before I went on stage, my friend had to come back because I started to cry because I was the last speaker. I was like, I can't do this. And she was like, it's not about you. It's about that person who needs to know and know that it's going to be okay. And that you're saying something for the people who can't. And then I stepped on stage and shared the story. But for me, the transformation moment was before they made it public. I was like, I need to show my family. And that's when we talked about my brother again, when they were able to see the TED Talk, because when he was buried, my family's like, we're not talking about it. He passed away. That's what it is. But then they started having discussions. I have a cousin who is a director at a local Boys and Girls Clubs, and he shows it at his club. And it's just so many people are showing it at their job. And for me, the big thing is I was able to heal through that process, but also it honors my brother. And it brings awareness that even as a leader, you still grieve and you have pain and you have hurt. And to be vulnerable, to be courageous and to be vulnerable and share something so personal, when my brother, to forgive myself, because sometimes I would get frustrated with him. I'm like, what are you doing? You're the oldest. Get it together. And to realize that I was insensitive and to publicly share that, like you don't get to say that. So my brother helped me change the narrative and to be sensitive about emotions, and that emotions, someone was talking about that today. Emotions matter. Emotions aren't bad, and that you can cry. When you cry, you actually release those toxins that are built up in your body. Crying does not, I don't care if you are the executive director, crying does not make you weak. You need to find a place to release, and we need to create a safe environment for people to cry, because the dangerous thing is if they don't cry, that's what happens in a work environment where people are slamming doors and then they're saying things that they really don't mean, but they didn't have that. It wasn't you they were mad at, but they didn't have a space to release or feel, because we don't normalize mental health or mental wellness, that they had kept all of this stuff up. And it was that one thing that lit that spark. So that's why I say something. And that's why the TED Talk for me was my healing process. Art was the way for me to release and to express, and a safe way for me to sit down and have a conversation with someone and with my team. So if I have a new team, that's something I share so they know that this was part of my process. And as a leader, there were things that I went through, and I had to be courageous and vulnerable. I can't ask my team or the kids that I serve to do something I wasn't willing to do.
Thank you. Thank you. So powerful. I think some of the conversations that we had setting up for this event too is to be very purposeful, to get to the heart of things. One of the conversations we had was about compound trauma altogether. So trauma that BIPOC people face, Black women, women of color face, and the things that we don't talk about in general. or in the workplace. And so I would love to hear thoughts on this. I know, Amy, you're also a leader in DEI. Can you talk about any practices you've put into action to create a safe environment for inclusivity and vulnerability like that?
Sure. And I'm not going to say that we have this right. We are all on a journey, and companies are certainly on a journey in this space in particular. But I will say that what we're seeing a lot more intentionality around is intersectionality. Because if you're not looking at the whole person, you'll miss them. So intersectionality has to be core to how we view each other. So we've got to be deliberate in how we talk about intersectionality and expose people to the varying levels of complexity of our human experience, right? So we do that through how we teach. We're educators in D&I, if nothing else, right? Flawed educators in our own struggles and our own journeys, but that's one of our main core competencies is education. We've got ERGs, employee resource groups, that have subgroups that support particular aspects of intersectionality and get to this. Like we just formed a Black and African American women's group within our Black and African American ERG. That's really powerful. And like I mentioned earlier, we provide free counseling to all employees, and we have trauma experts on staff. So, we intentionally share our stories, and we help people with resources, and we try to drive not just from creating an awareness, but to an action around how do we support people in their multidimensional selves.
Thank you. I feel like I haven't heard about organizations having trauma experts on staff. Lakita or Alicia, have you seen any of that happening?
So yes, when I was at the Boys and Girls Club, we had trauma-informed care because there were we were focusing on social emotional learning, and a lot of people didn't understand in order to take a kid from backpack to briefcase, if a kid has a hole, you can't judge them because they're having trouble learning in school. There's a reason. What's the why behind it? There's a great book Oprah has out in Dr. Perry, but what happened? And so when you get to the root of the why and what happened, maybe some of the ACEs that are happening around them or with them, and even staff were being triggered by certain things that happened with the students. I was there a long time. At the Boys and Girls Club, it was important to get to the why with the staff and with the students of how can we support them? What is trauma? What are the ACEs? If you've never been exposed to that. So I was really excited to see that happening at the Boys and Girls Club. Other resources they were providing, they were providing different workshops, different physical workshops that could help with balance. And they talked about essential oil. So all of those sort of things that they were bringing to the organization. But that first step that I hadn't seen over my 13 years was when they brought in trauma-informed care. And it wasn't just for people who did direct service. Leaders and VPs also had to take that training.
And I just want to add to that too, that, yeah, I mean, I've heard more that organizations are taking a more trauma-informed care approach. I remember an interview that I had about 6 years ago, and the first question they asked was about trauma-informed care. What do you know about it? How do you take a trauma-informed care approach? Because it's really important. And I have not heard about organizations having specific trauma counselors, which I'm very excited to hear about. I think trauma has a stigmatization to it that it has to be something extremely severe, a big T trauma, but we forget that there's also little t traumas, and trauma is truly something that you define as your own. You determine what is traumatic for you. So I think that it's extremely common, and I'm so happy to hear that workplaces are going in this direction of offering that resource to their employees.
Thank you. That's really encouraging to hear too, I think. Thanks. Alicia, I'm wondering if you could, how can we navigate the challenge of figuring out what it is specifically that we need, self-help, mental health, all those things. How do we communicate that in the workplace, or learn how to ask for help? Do you have some tips or tricks for that?
I do.
Mhm.
So, learning what you need is really what comes first is having some mindfulness and taking those pauses to ask yourself, how am I feeling physically? How am I feeling mentally? And what does this mean for me? How did this happen? So tuning into what triggered that, and how has your sleep and nutrition been? Have you been feeling unmotivated and lethargic? Are you relying on unhealthy coping skills? Have you had trouble focusing on things? Is work being missed, or are you making more mistakes at work? Have you been able to enjoy things in life? And some examples of self-care, and I know there was some great, I think they called them rules for initiating change in the last slideshow prior to the panel. But, taking a break, I heard, was on there, and doing something that's not productive, including taking a vacation day for yourself and not for a reason. Proper sleep, magnesium can be really helpful, although I'll put in the disclaimer, I'm not a medical doctor. So, but magnesium does reduce anxiety, engaging support from friends, assessing where you're placing your energy again. Also making sure you're doing an assessment on that caffeine and hydration, because caffeine can induce anxiety. Letting go of what doesn't serve you, decreasing clutter. How does your office space look and your home environment look? And at the end of the week, maybe doing a mental health check-in of I feel, I need, I forgive, I celebrate, I release, I recognize, asking yourself those tough questions. There's a really great book called Breathe Mama Breathe, 5-minute mindfulness exercises. It's geared toward moms, of course, but the 5-minute mindfulness exercises can be really great. They're practical, they're quick, and you can really tune into, how am I feeling right now? So now the hard question of, how do I ask for what I need? I think you just need to believe in yourself, know what your rights are, and decide what you want and how to clarify for yourself exactly what you need. Get any facts that you might need so you're clear on what you're asking for, and then express and assert them clearly. Be firm and persistent. And the more you practice asking for what you need, of course, the more comfortable it's going to feel in the future, and the more you're going to start to change the culture and dynamic in your workplace.
Thank you. And I just want to say, Calm Powder is a magnesium powder that tastes like pink lemonade. It's my favorite. If you take too much, you'll get a stomach ache. That's the polite way of saying what happens.
It's great in smoothies or coffee or anything you want to mix it in. It tastes great.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things we had talked about too was just that self-care looks different for everybody. Some people can't do a full day. Sometimes it's, I'm going to put 20 minutes. You've said this in the past to me, Alicia, 20 minutes on a Sunday reading a book, because, women who have large families or take care of other people, it looks different for everybody. Yeah. Thank you. I wanted to ask, because we got a question from someone who is a viewer. How would, and this is for all of you, so how would you help a coworker or team member whose productivity is being affected by mental health? Is there a space for understanding and empathy while also expecting the work gets done?
Well,
thank you.
I've been in this situation before, and I think what I learned from it is that you can't make assumptions, right? So you really have to sit down and talk with this person and try to understand in a sensitive and non-prying way, because this is also someone's personal business here. But try to help them understand how you can be supportive. Here, just checking in, want to make sure everything's okay. Let me know how you're doing. And then make that a routine part of how you show up for people. like Lakita said, you know, before you go into a meeting or before you have your one-on-one, don't just bulldoze through the list. Even if you only have 15 minutes with them, hey, I'm just checking in. How are you? Over time, people will start to get used to hearing that from you, take you seriously, and they might actually take you up on filling you in, right? And then you can start to unpack what it is that might be in their way and try to solve or help them through it. At the end of the day, they do need to continue to perform. So I mean, that's a non-negotiable, but what have you done in order to support them to be able to still perform? That's on you as a leader, right? If you have not created that space for them to be able to show up and maybe recover or actualize and get the help that they need, you know, then you're part of it. Does that make sense? So showing up for our people and giving them support through it, I think is really important.
Thank you. And I just want to leave a moment in case Lakita or Alicia has anything to add.
Yeah, I would add just having mirroring what Amy had said, having an open dialogue in the workplace and checking in. So not just that one time, how can I support you, but other check-in periods where you're asking questions and assessing where you're at with that support, because the support may change day to day, and creating space for the conversation to happen, taking the time, listening, pausing, and engaging a culture of self-care and allowing time for outside appointments too. I think a lot of times, you know, if people are struggling, one of the barriers for asking for help is time off for those appointments. Maybe people aren't wanting to take their vacation time for those important appointments for their mental health, or if they're struggling. So if it's possible, allowing space for that too.
And so everything they talked about, I totally agree with. And just creating, the biggest thing is just creating that culture of safety. And you will know, paying attention to nonverbal cues. I also incorporate books that we as a team read. And in one of the meetings, I incorporated an exercise that we'll do that's just centered around self-care and relaxation. So they know it's something that is not a taboo topic, that they can be vulnerable. And I also share as well.
Thank you. As an employee, how would you suggest talking to your boss or your higher ups about mental health struggles that you're having?
I think this comes back to, you know, really assessing first what it is that you need and being really clear about what it is that you're asking for. And like I'd said before, just being firm and persistent and really advocating for the space to have the conversation about what it is that you need, and trying again if you feel like it didn't work the first time.
And I'm a pretty direct person. So I just talk about, even in the interview process, working for a company, I look for, especially if you're going to be my supervisor, I talk about my needs during my interview process. So I show my real self. And so they know who I am coming out the gate. And so when I am struggling or having a hard time, I know I have a supervisor that I can go and talk to, or someone an ally in the space that I can go and talk to. If I don't know how to do it, they can help me create the language to advocate for the needs that I have.
That's great advice. I'm glad you said that. I love that.
Thank you. And I wanted to ask, I know we have about 7 minutes left here. So many of the people in the audience have dependents, have children. There's guardians, adoptive parents, foster parents, people who've had pregnancy loss. I'm wondering, and I mean, this can be from everybody, but I'm also thinking of Alicia. What are some of the stigmas that you see around perinatal mental health? I know that some of you have experienced it too. And then if you have any examples of how to cope or how to make space in the workplace for either those discussions or just perinatal mental health in general?
Yeah, so some of the stigmas attached to perinatal mental health and women in general who have kids or people who have families, women won't be as productive when they come back to work, or they'll use all of their sick time. They won't be able to keep up, or maybe won't have the mental clarity they had prior to their maternity leave. And so, which are all unfortunate and definitely stigmas. I think in ways to cope with that, or ways that women can cope in the workplace, again, the Breathe Mama Breathe book for the mindfulness exercises, and taking those pauses, even if you have to set a timer on your phone or your computer, to assess, how am I feeling right now and what do I need? Mindful Mamas app, if you're not a reader like me, the app might be a little bit better of an avenue. Perfect, really short mindfulness exercises. And then how the workplace can be more flexible with perinatal mental health. I think a big one here, and not a shocker, is the paid maternity leave and paid family leave is huge. Flexibility and just giving that time for people to heal after after a perinatal period, regardless of how, where they are in that spectrum. Having open communication, discussing the expectations, and allowing for outside appointments too. I mean, I know families who have younger kids are welcoming new family members. Kids have a lot of appointments, and so allowing for the employee to also have appointments for themselves.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We have another question that was sent in. So there's someone who's in an organization that values which I think a lot of us might be, but in an organization that values overworking and policies over people. Do you have any suggested resources to bring to leadership as a starting point to kind of change that narrative? And I'm not sure if Amy, you have anything, but I would love to hear from anybody too.
Let's hear it for employee opinion surveys. I'm a big fan of doing internal, research and development, test and learn. And I think bringing data-driven solutions to leaders is really impactful. If something is not working and you can not prove it to me, but you can help me understand through data and through storytelling. So data is the numbers that speak to one part of my head. The stories are the others of real life examples in the workplace that speak to my heart. And if I can make a connection there, then I'm going to help you solve for that. But I think a lot of times, and you hear this in conversations often, leadership does not necessarily understand what's going on in the organization at certain levels because they're not there, right? Just like other levels of the organization really don't understand how decisions are made at the top, right? So how do we bridge those gaps? One of the tools that we use is feedback mechanisms. So I would just say that data plus the stories, and even if you don't have the data, that's okay. Not every company does that. But if you can bring to a leader an experience of how this is real for you or how this is real for others in the organization, and you can help build that bridge, that connection with that leader to foster understanding, that's a great first step.
Thank you. Awesome. I know we have 1 to 2 minutes left. I would like to ask, what are some phrases or words that we could maybe adjust more immediately to shift the narrative around mental health? And this is about like inclusive language or the other microaggressions. I'm just thinking about some tangible things to sort of more immediately shift some of that. Do any of you had thoughts? I know we talked about the word crazy being overused a lot.
I would say even bipolar. Man, the weather's bipolar right now. I hear that all of the time. Like it's almost like nails on the chalkboard. We say it so naturally, but we have to change the narrative of that, because if there's that's so insensitive to someone who may be bipolar. So that I hear that in crazy all of the time. Or even with women in their cycles, she must be,
Oh my gosh.
It's like,
Yeah, I'd have to agree with bipolar. The other examples we had talked about prior to this, crazy, insane, but bipolar is really a sensitive one. And especially when, one of my clients is diagnosed with bipolar, and then processing that, for the people who are diagnosed with that, but then it's so stigmatized, not just in the workplace, but everywhere. I mean, people just don't realize what it actually is, what it means for people who have it. So just bringing some awareness to our use to that language.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's one of my favorite things to talk about. I know it makes a lot of people uncomfortable too, but I can't even tell you how much I appreciate your vulnerability, being open and bringing us the perspectives of experience, of the workplace, of working in mental health. And it's really eye-opening, and it fills me up. It's encouraging. So I appreciate that. Thank you. And I want to invite anybody who is watching in the chat, if you have resources, if you really like your therapist and want to recommend, if you have, share those right now. I know some of the resources that we had discussed previously, there are different grad school programs that offer, pay what you can scales for people who have trouble with finances or can't afford therapy. But if you could put your resources there to share with each other, it usually is a quick Google search in case you have team members, employees, friends that need something like that. Thank you so much. Thank you. I can't thank you enough. It was my pleasure. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and thank you for continuing this conversation in this space as you influence. It's incredibly important.
Woo-hoo. Thank you.
thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. I didn't want to cut anybody off. Thank you. Wonderful. Okay, so we're going to be finishing up. We're bringing Cassie back. Fabulous. Thank you. Hi, Cassie.
Hi, and thank you to all the panelists, and thank you, Jessie, for moderating that. That was incredible. It's so important to share all of our stories. I know I have my own. I experienced a lot of anxiety and especially depression over the past year, and I decided to seek out therapy once again in the fall, and it was one of the best decisions that I have made. So thank you so much for sharing your story and being open with everyone. So how is it almost noon?
No.
Oh.
Yeah, it was such a morning. It was fabulous.
Yeah. And so many things that I took away from the panel. Lakita, your body never lies. That was something that took away. You can't drive a car that doesn't have any gas, which spoke to me so much. And so how are we going to take care of other people if we can't get to them ourselves? So many things. The self-help board, ending your weeks with just checking in. Like, I feel, I need, I forgive, I celebrate, and just thinking about the week past. So anything else that you took away, Jessie?
Oh my goodness. I think all of it. I think just the fact of them being open about their experiences and speaking out loud, I think that is a huge start. I think I try to bring up in meetings sometimes, just like, oh yeah, well, with my anxiety, this is how I do this or whatever, just to casually make it part of our conversations and everything we do. And it still makes people uncomfortable. I think they pause, but I think it's slowly changing, and it's little things that I'm trying to do every day to kind of shift what I can or make other people feel comfortable too in talking about this. So I really appreciate it. I appreciate knowing kind of what has been going on maybe during the pandemic. I think bringing specifically women's mental health and BIPOC mental health and some of the trauma, compounded trauma, things like that. I think that's really important to bring to the forefront. And I don't know, I kind of loved all of it. Thank you.
Absolutely. I know I quite a few years back, I saw this advertisement for a hospital, and it has just stuck with me my whole life. It showed everyone that's walking into a hospital and all the different emotions and experiences that people may be feeling. And that's the same in real life. You just never know what kind of news someone just got, what they're going through in life, and just being kind and empathetic and really taking the time to ask someone how they're doing. And I know saw someone in the chat say, oh, I just say fine all the time, which is so easy. How are you doing? Fine. So it's such an important conversation to have. So thank you so much for moderating that.
Yeah.
We'd also love to hear from all of you what some of your favorite takeaways were in the chat. So the chat has been so active, and thank you so much. It's been incredible. So type some things in the chat, things that you've taken away from today.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And we want to give, or did you want to go over any of that, or you just want them to share?
We can click, let me.
You didn't want to. Okay.
I know we have.
Here I'm able, I thank our sponsors too, because woohoo.
Yes.
Okay.
Because we just be here. Go ahead, Jesse.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Just one final acknowledgement of our sponsors, including presenting sponsor Goodwill Industries of Southeastern Wisconsin. This event wouldn't have been possible without them and without each of our 21 sponsors. Thank you so much.
And also a big, huge shout out and thank you to the Magic team and Brent for all of the help behind the scenes. We couldn't have done it without you. And on behalf of Tempo, Emerging Women Leaders, and the Planning Committee, I want to thank you so much all for coming and taking the time out of your day to invest in yourself. We'll be sending around a survey this afternoon, so please let us know what you thought so we can make next year's event even better. Have a great rest of your day, everyone, and EWL members, we hope to see you later this afternoon at the Beer Garden. Thank you, everyone.